One thing that has defined the media in this era is, without a doubt, the interest in fancy clothing, especially when it comes from the most expensive of all the expensive clothing brands in the world. However, it is just a brand name that is seen, and from brands like Lacoste, one can only wonder exactly how the brand grew from the shadows of its ugly past. In the Lacoste brand, we see the evolution of a man who got laughed at for sewing a crocodile into his pocket and ended up creating a luxury brand. Let's start from the beginning. Whom it started with. For every brand that is worth something, there is a name, or perhaps names that references are drawn to explain how the brand came to be. In the case of Lacoste, we can trace this reference to a man called René Lacoste. René Lacoste came from one of the top families in France, and while you might be quick to believe that must have attributed to the success of the Lacoste brand, well, you might want to think again. René came from a wealthy and respected family in France, and one thing common about these types of families is how the lives of the children are usually mapped out for them. For René, he grew up with a rather strict and conservative father who wanted his son to hold an important position in the future. However, his boy wanted nothing to do with the formality of important positions. He had an unfathomable interest in sports, more specifically, in tennis, and up until he was 15 years of age, he tried as much as possible to spend every free minute he could get hitting the balls with a racket. He was persistent with the training even though he was majorly self-teaching and sometimes supervised by teachers. He was somewhat addicted to the life of a tennis player, yet he was a bit too frail, neither did he have the poise or physique to be a professional at this time. Eventually, he saw a clear shot, and he took it. While being with an aristocratic father would have been burdensome for René, he was able to enter into an agreement with his father, who gave him all but 5 years to become a world champion. As time began to run, René was more obsessed with hard training, and although the sleepless nights were beginning to tell, his determination remained. This determination would quickly come in handy in the success of the famous brand. From watching the professionals play, he quickly rose to the top of his game, and by 1923, he had received a formal invitation to the largest international tennis tournament in France, and the next year, he was rated as one of the most successful tennis players in the country. Although his life prior to the Lacoste brand might seem of little importance, this could not be any farther from the truth. The actions of his tennis career lay a strong foundation for Lacoste. Then came the inscribed crocodile. It is somewhat impossible to think of the Lacoste brand without having a mental image of a crocodile. And in case you have ever wondered why a crocodile was chosen to bear the trademark of the luxury brand, this part of this video would help clear that out. While René Lacoste went on one of his frequent professional tennis trips, he came across an eye-catchy piece of accessory on the window of a clothing shop. It was a very expensive and exquisitely patterned crocodile leather suitcase. Seeing as it was not cheap, he promised to get the suitcase once he won the tournament that brought him to Boston. Well, he did win the tournament, but by the time he visited the clothing shop, the crocodile suitcase was off the hands of the vendor. But before this, René had been nicknamed the Crocodile by the media for his playing style. His jump jerk method of playing tennis, coupled with missing out on the crocodile suitcase, had a close friend of his, Robert George, thinking of him. Robert George, a part-time artist, gave him a drawing of a crocodile. But this was no normal crocodile drawing. It had its graceful mouth shapes and small details depicted in the drawing enchanted René so much that the very next day, he gave a white blazer to an LTA to transfer the drawing to one of its pockets. This was the beginning of the crocodile engraving becoming associated with René Lacoste. In 1927, another USA tennis tournament was on, and René decided to enter the USA tournaments in a white polo shirt with just 3 buttons. Now, it is imperative that we add here that this was the period when there was a strict dress code for tennis players. A white shirt was mandatory, but not only was René's clothing a polo, but it also featured the crocodile design that had become accustomed to his name. He was criticized a bit by many who felt his actions were a protest against the rules of the tennis tournaments. However, the polo dressing was comfortable, and it gave the players more flexibility to play than the shirt. Hence, other players decided to copy his style. At first, Ren had no issue with it, but the design became too popular that it overshadowed him, the designer of the style. After a while, he ended his tennis career. The future for Ren Lacoste and the Lacoste brand. Of course, Ren Lacoste wanted a break. He knew he needed it, and he could see the possibilities that he could reach from leveraging on the white polo with a crocodile drawing engraved to the side. And it wasn't long before he took to making true the possibility. He created the La Chemise Lacoste brand in 1933 while getting help from André Gillier, the owner and president of the largest French knitwear manufacturing firm at the time. By the 50s, word of the exquisite polo was so far spread that Ren decided to experiment with the possibility of having multiple colors as opposed to the patent plain white polo. And, of course, the plain colored polo shirts were as much of a hit as the white polo. The brand began to have a symbol of status, a sign of quality and uniqueness that was experienced only by a few. It was exclusive as well as expensive, yet people kept requesting and going as far as spending their last to partake in the status quo. It is quite interesting that through the growth of the Lacoste brand, as of this time, not a single penny was put into advertisement as other known brands of that period did. Ren Lacoste believed that if a product was of high quality, it needed no form of advertisement. However, one thing that Ren did in place of a media advert was to gift branded polos to persons of interest. And it was through that same decade of the 50s that John F. Kennedy and Clint Eastwood were first seen wearing a Lacoste branded polo shirt. This method of advertisement has worked tremendously for the brand, and it has continued to follow this pattern. From sportsmen and women in tennis to important public figures and golf stars like Jose Maria Olazabal and Colin Montgomery, who were seen sporting Lacoste-branded shirts in tournaments. The growth and expansion of Lacoste. One of the major advantages the Lacoste branding had from the start was how the products were not limited to outings. Many people loved the diversity and how easy it was to incorporate the polos into whatever event was in view. This increased the sales record of the brand and propelled René Lacoste to broaden the product scope. And this started towards the end of the 50s. In 1958, Lacoste began a clothing line that had its focused on children's wear. Prior to this clothing line, the Lacoste branded shirts focused mostly on men. However, it began to advance, accommodating and extending polo wear to women's preferences. Then, by the 60s, there was another change. This time, the change was to leather accessories. The move to leather accessories started with masculine wallets, bags, and wristwatches while adding the Lacoste tennis shoes and sunglasses in the 1980s. But just before the shoes came in, the company began selling perfumes in the 70s. If there is one thing that was constant over the years, it has been the attention to detail. And by doing this, the company was able to increase sales as well as product designs, getting the demand for them skyrocketing while also being the exclusive brand that René Lacoste envisioned from the start. However, like most successful businesses and brands, there comes a time when fortune turns the other way. For the Lacoste brand, this occurred of diverse controversies as well as the failing health of a key character of the Lacoste brand. The dusty cloud that loomed over Lacoste. As the company grew in sales and products, it became too much of a hassle for René Lacoste to oversee. His total retirement from the management of the company was necessary. However, it began in stages. By the time he had to leave, Bernard Lacoste, his son, had to take the wheels. The major problem of Bernard's approach was in increasing the sales and availability of Lacoste products. With more products and sales of these products, the Crocodile brand became unnecessarily common and lost that value of exclusivity by the end of the 90s. Then the sales problem began. People didn't feel the need to purchase any more of the products because they could be readily found even at Walmart. The business struggled to make it back to the vision that René Lacoste had of exclusivity and elegance, and through the help of a modern romantic named Christophe Lumière, the company created a new fashion line aimed at young people, and through this, Lumia Lacoste began to regain its top-notch exclusivity and began high in demand once more. In the last decade, specifically in the year 2011, the Lacoste brand was up for way more struggles. These problems began with the link to environmental pollution. The Lacoste brand was charged with heavy evidence for collaborating with Chinese suppliers who contributed to the Yangtze and Pearl Rivers pollution. Alkylphenols, perfluorinated compounds, and perfluorooctane sulfonate were found in samples taken from two facilities, one owned by the Younger Group and situated on the Yangtze River Delta, and the other by the Well Dyeing Factory Limited and situated on a tributary of the Pearl River Delta. This was in July 2011. And by the last month of that year, the Lacoste name was once again in the news for another alarming report. In December 2011, Lacoste was charged with obstructing Palestinian artist Larissa Sansara's work. One of the original 8 finalists for the coveted Lacoste Élysée Award was Sansar. The contest, which took place at the Musée de l'Élysée in Lausanne, Switzerland, was sponsored by Lacoste. Sansar's entry into the competition, Nation Estate, was a group of dystopic sci-fi graphics inspired by Palestine's admission to UNESCO. With each level representing a replica of one of the lost towns, such as Bethlehem, Ramallah, or Jerusalem, Sansar imagines the state to be imprisoned within a single structure. The Musée de l'Élysée informed Sansar that Lacoste had changed its mind about putting her work in the competition and asked the museum to remove her as a nominee, stating her work was too pro-Palestinian, a month before the selection jury was supposed to convene to determine the winner. Immediately after Sansar made her experience public, the Musée de l'Élysée came to her defense, claiming in a press release that Lacoste's insistence on keeping Sansar out of the competition led it to decide to sever its sponsorship agreement with it for this prize. Lacoste came under hot pressure and malicious slander from the public once the news of their act was known. It was widely spread so much that the incident was since dubbed the censorship of Palestine art. Without a doubt, the company has had its struggles plaguing fashion companies. But it has, at the same time, managed to outshine and move past the dusty clouds time and time again while expanding its horizons. In 1996, the company gained access to the Russian market, opening the very first Lacoste boutique in Moscow. The sheer simplicity and elegance poised by the branding products made it increasingly popular and wanted such that the company is today, in the 21st century. From founder to son, to brother and grandsons, the Lacoste company has remained under the exclusive ownership and control of the Lacoste family, and just as René Lacoste would have expected, it seats as one of the most famous and best-selling in the world, and the company's products are represented in more than 100 countries on all continents. Average annual sales are more than 50 million items, and their retail network has over 3,000 stores.